Right, we've taken a look at the R1 in a separate video, but we also have another big camera launch from Canon. We've got the R5 Mark II, which again I've been using for the best part of a day, flown out here to Germany so we could check it out in kind of some interesting different scenarios, right? Shooting basketball, shooting breakdancing, bit outside, bit all over the place. And this is absolutely a hybrid camera through and through. And just like the R5, which came out 4 years ago, if you can believe that, this is designed to pretty much be the ultimate hybrid camera, an absolute video powerhouse, but also capable of taking some really impressive stills as well. And that's absolutely what the R5 II feels like when you're using it. It also very impressively carries over a lot of the same kind of technology and spec that you see in the R1, which means that you're getting this just lightning fast autofocus performance, really accurate and reliable, just some really impressive stuff in this camera, and just some notable upgrades across the board from the original R5, including, I think this is quite important, dealing with heat, which, if we're being fair, when the R5 came out, that was quite a big story, quite a big deal, and it's important that Canon kind of acknowledges that, and they have, and they're doing things to kind of sort that. Now, we'll get onto that in a bit. We'll talk about some spec, we'll talk about some stuff, but my overall thoughts of this camera, and I'm literally coming to you straight now from having been in there shooting with it for best part of, I don't know how many hours, just in the heat. It's very hot in there, just absolutely going for it, just constantly shooting. This is a very lovely camera. So we are looking at a new sensor, still 45 megapixels. I think probably some people would have liked a slightly higher resolution. I think that's a fine resolution. I think it strikes a balance between kind of very high levels of detail and a nice high res, and not getting ridiculous when it comes to file size. I think 45 megapixels, if we're being honest, is still more than enough for almost all types of photography. And along with that new sensor, we've got a new processor in the camera, and we've got that Digic accelerator that we've seen in the R1. And actually, if you've seen our R1 video, or if you just looked at the R1 online, the R5 II shares really quite an enormous amount with the R1, which is really interesting. And actually, if you did want higher resolution, if you did want more detail in your image, you do have the same technology we've seen in the R1, which allows you to upscale images in camera. So after you've taken the image, you can actually go into the menus and upscale the image. It's all done in camera for you, and that takes it up to 180 megapixels. It then allows you to crop in if you want to get a high detailed kind of zoomed in image, and also applies this new neural noise reduction system, which gives you a nice clean final product. So if you do want higher resolution, that is a great way of doing it, because it allows you to be very selective about which images you want to have in a higher res. Now, it's faster than the original R5 as well, 30 frames a second. So you really can shoot at pretty decent speeds. You'd want to be using the CF Express Type B cards for this, but that's nice and impressive, because that really allows you a huge amount of flexibility for what you're going to be shooting. You could absolutely shoot sports, wildlife, fast moving stuff with the R5 II, which means this is a proper true hybrid kind of shoot everything camera, which is great. Now, Canon say rolling shutter has been reduced by 60% compared to the original R5. I didn't get to test it down to the degree of working out the percentage, but it does look like it's been reduced, so I totally believe the statistic. And while it actually feels very similar to shoot with to the R5, there are some differences, but it feels very similar. Actually, in the camera, there's a lot of enhancements, and speed is a big part of that. So I mentioned the 30 frames a second, but just across the board, the camera is just operating much faster. And with that comes much improved autofocus. Now, I didn't ever really have a big problem with the autofocus in the original R5, but here, we are seeing a much faster, smarter, and more accurate autofocus system. The way that it tracks subjects around the scene is really impressive to actually watch happening live. In stills and in video, it just nails it. Whether you're shooting groups, right? Lots of people in the frame, it just seems to understand who it should be shooting. It seems to actually get it. And for me, it was the autofocus that really stood out, a lot like with the R1, as kind of one of the standout improvements of this camera. And actually, it's really cool to see that they've added in the eye control that we saw in the R3 and the R1, allowing you to control the focus point with your eye in the EVF. So actually, just by moving and looking, once you've calibrated it, which takes about 30 seconds to do, maybe less than that actually. It might be 20 seconds, something like that. Not very long, is what I'm saying. You can then just look where you want the focus point to be and move it around like that, which is kind of one of the things that sounds like a gimmick. until you use it and you realize it's super, super useful, especially if you are shooting, you want to be able to move that point. It only works in stills at the moment. I don't know if there'll be any plans to move it into video as well. I think it'll be incredibly useful in video because you could essentially focus pull by looking where you want it to focus. That'd be amazing. But at the moment it's just in stills, but still very useful for photography. Now, absolutely through and through, this is a hybrid camera. Canon were very keen to point that out, just like the R5. And this is designed 100% to be a video powerhouse. There is so much that this camera could do when it comes to video, but importantly, this is a lot more reliable in terms of how it can shoot than the R5. Now, the R5 was improved, let's be fair. It was improved a lot by firmware updates and things like that, but there was a problem at launch with heat. I'm sure you remember. You probably don't need me to tell you. It did overheat pretty quick. The R5 II, really happy to say, not only did it seem to perform really well at shooting at 8K, and we'll get into all the specs in a minute, shooting at 8K, 4K 120, I was using this for hours. And not only was I using it for hours, it was so hot, over 30 degrees, we're indoors, there's no air conditioning. It was a very hot environment. I'm not sure whether Canon did that deliberately to try and prove a point, but it really did allow me to see that the camera is not going to be having that same overheating problem at all. So the actual heat dissipation is significantly improved in camera. Canon are actually releasing an optional grip with this camera as well, which has a built-in fan, which is very clever because if you want to use this camera specifically for video and you think you are going to be shooting things like 8K, maybe 4K 120 for extended periods of time, using that optional grip gives you so much flexibility for how long you can shoot for. It really is an enormous amount of time. And actually, to be honest, you are going to run into storage problems way before you run into heat problems if you're shooting in 8K for that long. Because if you shoot for that long in 8K, the file sizes are going to be outrageous. And like I say, Canon really want this to be a proper video powerhouse of a camera. So you've got 8K up to 60 frames a second. You can shoot in RAW, 4K 120, 2K or Full HD up to 240 frames a second. Things like the color science, the codecs actually match up with cameras like the C400. So you could use this as a second camera, as a B camera, and actually match that footage with a proper cine camera like the C400 and not have a problem where things don't match or it's very obvious in your timeline that the files are different, it's from different cameras. Actually, it's all going to match up. Totally usable, which means you can have your C400 locked in as maybe your A cam, and then you've got something like the R5 II as your B cam. Maybe you have that doing some handheld footage. It's going to be so much more useful because it is so much smaller. That'll be such a useful way to shoot because it's so much smaller, because it is so handholdable. And you have all these different ways to shoot, which gives you so much flexibility again on the way you want to shoot. And that really is the kind of name of the game, I think, here with the R5 II is flexibility, versatility. You are in control of what you want things to look like, how you want to shoot, whether it's photos or video. You really have so much customization available to you for the way you want the camera to actually capture all of that stuff. Now, I mentioned handheld video shooting just then. The R5 had some great image stabilization. That's absolutely true here as well, up to 8.5 stops. And it's so smooth shooting handheld, which does mean that if you want to use this for handheld video or with a nice slow shutter speed, you absolutely can. That's not going to be a problem. And it's not just the speed of shooting at 30 frames a second. You've also got the option to shoot blackout free, which is always a nicer way to shoot if you are shooting fast moving subjects and you're trying to track them yourself. So it's great to see that in the camera. In terms of the body of the camera, it's exactly as you would expect from the R5. You're going to be right at home, but there are some small changes. So definitely a pro level body, right? Nice and weather sealed. There are some changes though to the way some of the controls work. So for example, you've now got a switch up in the top left to switch between photo and video, which is much better than having to go through the convoluted way than kind of pressing this button and info and then moving across. I much prefer just having a switch. It did take me, I don't know, it did take me half an hour to get used to, just because I'm so used to how the original R5 controls with that. But this is much, much better. And things like the EVF have been improved as well. So it's twice as bright as on the original R5, which is great because if you do shoot two eyes open, that is just a much nicer experience because the world is bright. And now the EVF is kind of going to almost match that. So it's less of a headache, to be honest. just much nicer to shoot that way. There's loads of stuff we haven't touched on with this camera, but for me, this is absolutely aiming to be the ultimate hybrid camera for photographers and videographers. So someone like me who does shoot a bit of everything and lots of different genres and always experimenting, this is the perfect kind of camera for that kind of thing. If you do shoot professionally as well, you can shoot photos, you can shoot video, you could go and do weddings for this, you could do landscape, portrait, and then you can move over to food. This really is such an all-rounder of a camera, and what I love is how much versatility, like I said before, that Canon have added in to what this camera can do. So much customization, so much flexibility on the photo and the video side of things. It just makes for such a lovely shooting experience, and with lots of upgrades like the autofocus working so well. It's just working overtime as a tool for you to make everything just run better, just work better. Now, we'll definitely have a follow-up video to this because there's so much to talk about. We'll probably do a full video actually comparing this directly against maybe the R1, directly against the R5. We'll talk about all that kind of stuff. Any questions, pop them in the comments, but you can check out the full spec for yourself by heading over to pilecameras.com. There's a link down in the description to go and check that out for yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well because there's new stuff all the time. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.